study the history of this world, and we ask for thy help to have an open heart to thy spirit, that we may know the truths that we find in history, that we may discern between good and evil, and that we may make good choices in our day. And we say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Great. Thank you so much. Okie dokie. Well, okay. Welcome, Heidi. How are you?
Hi. I'm just fine. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay. So we're going to talk about America's decision to enter World War II, and we're going to look at FDR and the road from neutrality to belligerence, or meaning a state of war. Okay, so you've read FDR's State of the Union address. That was the For Freedom speech. State of the Union address from January 1941, and also his speech from December 8th, 1941. Judging by these two documents, how did the position of the United States change regarding World War II during 1941?
From neutrality and just providing assistance to declaring war.
Right. So, of course, a simple question, and that's the answer. But why did it change? What do you think?
Well, the obvious answer would be Harvard, but I think there's more to it than that.
I'm sorry. I just heard, I think, maybe the last thing that you may have said.
Oh, I said the obvious answer is Pearl Harbor, but I think there's more to it than that. And somebody else, I think I cut somebody else off.
Was that Christina? Were you saying something?
It was probably me. I was just going to say Pearl Harbor.
Oh, okay. Okay, so Pearl Harbor, and then maybe something more than Pearl Harbor. Well, certainly, if we think about FDR, and this is what we're really going to talk about today, so don't worry if you're not sure now, because we'll do a lot of forwarding and learning about it today. But how do you think FDR's stance on the war may have changed, or maybe how do you think it really remains the same?
Well, I noticed in his first speech, the January 1941, he seemed to say that there was more danger to the United States as the Axis powers were, if they were able to take over. I don't know if that really changed much. He might have felt that way the whole time, but he did come out and say that it seemed like the United States would be threatened sooner rather than later, and he kind of tried to express that there was danger there. But like I said, he might have felt that way the whole time, and maybe that it remained the same, and he just wanted to try to help the United States to make a decision about entering the war or not. I'm not sure.
Yeah, definitely. Any other thoughts?
Well, one way in which it remained the same is that he mentioned he was always expecting a physical attack, and I think he knew exactly what he would do when that came, and so in that way I think his stance was the same.
Yeah. Well, let's examine that. That's what we're going to look at. A famous quote: "This nation will remain a neutral nation, but I cannot ask that every American remain neutral in thought as well." Close quote. That's from FDR. And he said that shortly after World War II began in 1939. And it's interesting because, as you will see today through these slides that I have for you to give you some context for our forwarding, through his actions over the next 3 years, the President proved time and time again that he was an American who was unambiguously unneutral in thought. Like FDR, the majority of Americans, and this is kind of what Christina was saying a little bit, sided with Britain and France over Germany, Italy, and Japan. We saw some as those who were friends and others who were enemies. But what did that really mean for the United States? FDR believed that it meant providing armaments to the Allies. And in September of 1939, he asked Congress to revise the Neutrality Acts that had been signed after World War I, which had forbidden the U.S. to sell weapons to any belligerent nation, any nation at war. Weakened by some protests from isolationists in Congress, the revision that FDR wanted did pass, and when it passed, it permitted nations to purchase arms from the United States on a cash and carry basis, but it forbade U.S. ships with armaments from entering war zones. And so you ask, okay, so what did that mean? Well, that meant that as American aid sailed through war zones on foreign ships, chiefly British ships. So we would load it, but they had to carry it. We would sell it to them after the revision of the Neutrality Acts. On May 16th, we see FDR upping the budget for arms. He asked for $1 billion to bolster America's armed forces in case of war. Also in May, Churchill sent FDR a long list of requests for armaments, military stores, things that Britain could use in its fight against Germany. And it's interesting, though, because at this time, many Americans believed that Britain was fighting a losing battle, and they thought that aid would be a waste. But FDR took a huge political risk by saying, no, 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 we will, quote, scrape the bottom of the barrel to help the British with their armaments. And he would have said that, you know, the French had also helped America in the War of Independence, and if France hadn't helped us, you know, we probably wouldn't be here today. And so he said, you know, I will make ships and planes available to the British, and he did that. Following the fall of France, and then watching as Britain bravely struggled alone, over 2/3 of Americans in a poll believed that German success was truly a threat to the United States. And so we see this Burke-Wadsworth Act, which we talked about a little bit before, as the act that would institute a draft during peacetime. And this would be the first peacetime draft in American history in September 1940. Well, it's interesting because we see a minority of Americans who opposed expanding American involvement in World War II. And they made up a group called America First. This was a committee that was a powerful lobbying group. The group was chaired by General Robert E. Wood, who was the former president of Sears Roebuck, you know, Sears, the big department store, and supported by Charles Lindbergh, the aviation hero, General Hugh Johnson, senators Nye and then Wheeler, William Randolph Hearst, the newspaper magnate, Sinclair Lewis, E.E. Cummings, the writers, Walt Disney, who you know, and then a very young Gore Vidal and then Gerald Ford, as well as 800,000 other members who made this group, America First, the largest isolationist group in American history. But after Pearl Harbor, the group was quickly disbanded. Following the end of 1940, after winning an unprecedented third term, remember, we hadn't had any presidents with more than 2 terms before this, and Washington set the precedent, but FDR threw precedent to the wind and said, no, you know, if they want me, I'll run again, and he ran again, and he won, and in fact, he'd win 4 terms. This is his 3rd term, but in his 3rd term, he increasingly led the United States toward abandoning neutrality. In December 1940, we've read the speech that he gave, The Arsenal of Democracy, in which he said that, you know, we need to build up our own defenses, but we also need to be the arsenal of democracy for the world to help the British and others to defeat the Axis. Then, in something that was very controversial, he vowed to eliminate the dollar sign from arms deals with virtually bankrupt Britain by beginning the Lend-Lease system, which allowed the United States to lend or lease, instead of just sell, armaments to any nation deemed vital to the defense of the United States, for only a promise of reimbursement after the war. Isolationists protested bitterly, saying that the measure bound America and the Allies even more closely together, but the Congress passed the bill by a very large majority. Okay, so you've read the State of the Union address from January 1941, also known as the Four Freedoms speech. If you either remember or if you go to those pages, I'd like to 4R with you now about them. Pages 70 and 71, what does FDR say about the new order of tyranny? What does he say about it? If you look in the very first paragraph on page 70, that's where it starts.
Well, I assume he's talking about the tyranny of all of the big leaders at that point, Hitler, Mussolini, and Stalin, and,
right.
And the fact that democracy is being threatened worldwide.
Right. That's exactly what he's saying. He's saying this new order of tyranny is spreading throughout the world. the war is an example of this tyranny spreading, and it is a threat to democracy, not just in Europe, but worldwide, including the United States. Definitely. If we look on page 71, he reports that the future and safety of our country and of our democracy are overwhelmingly involved in events far beyond our borders. What do you think he means by that?
Well, I think it's ironic that it's in the speech that talks about freedom from fear, because I think he's trying to create fear. Mm-hmm. Certainly democracy was being threatened in Europe, but it cannot be said for certain that the safety of our country and our form of government was being threatened. To me, this is fear-mongering. Mm-hmm. And I think it's ironic that it's in a speech that talks about freedom from fear.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the interesting thing is that freedom from fear specifically for FDR meant arms reduction. It meant disarmament. But yet here he's talking specifically about increasing arms production. Now, with the world at war, that makes a little more sense. But as we think about that, and we think about how FDR talks about, well, you know, there is a potential of attack from across the Pacific, from across the Atlantic, and then we would be alone to defend democracy, and so we need to be ready. It's interesting if we think about that. Why might people have rallied to what he said at this time? What would 3 reasons have been to support his statement? And then, of course, the follow-up question will be, what would 3 reasons be to oppose his statement that, you know, really our protection is tied up in what's going on foreign shores? What do you think? 3 reasons that could support it, at least in his mind or the minds of other Americans at the time who may have agreed.
I think it might have been scary for Americans to hear the Germans being able to take over more and more countries and just start thinking, well, you know, if they take over the whole of Europe, are they going to, you know, have this huge power that's going to come against us? I'm sure that just seeing the events of the Germans seeming to win would probably strike a lot of fear in the hearts of people and believe that this statement is definitely true.
Sure. And it was widely publicized that Germany's plan was to take over France and then Britain, and then use all of their military stores, especially ships, to stage a sea attack across the Atlantic Ocean against the United States. That was something that was known at this point, at least as a potential, and that potential alone made Americans very afraid. So yeah, Christina, you definitely hit the nail on the head there. That's certainly a huge reason why people could have been swayed by this. Any others?
Well, supporting his statement would be, you know, just the numbers that you get all these countries under Hitler's control or under Japan's control, and eventually Americans become outnumbered. A reason that would oppose that statement, however, is I think there's the faulty thinking is that all those people are going to cooperate with Hitler. You know, there could have been lots of insurgencies. Hitler could have overextended his empire very easily, and you know, so there's all kinds of things that go wrong when empires try to expand so fast, so soon.
Right, right.
So you know that would nullify the first reason that I gave.
Yeah, yeah. Any other reasons that could support it, and then a few more that could oppose it? What do we think?
Well, here's another one that would oppose it.
Sure.
Although, you know, you couldn't have spoken probably publicly about it at the time and gotten people to pay attention to you, but I don't think it was in God's plan for Hitler to take over America. I think as long as Americans would have stayed righteous and would have leaned on God for support, that miracles could have happened, and and until God commanded them to go to war, that probably should have been their take on it.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks so much for that, Wendy. What else would we say? Anything against it? Anything for it? I mean, because, I mean, really, you think about it, this is really the expansionists or the interventionists versus the isolationists, right? And so as we try to weigh both sides, are there any other big arguments that we haven't stated for either side?
Weakening our own, going out and fighting others is a weakening of our own strength.
Yeah, that's exactly what America First was saying. You got it. Well, definitely. Well, let's keep looking then. Thanks for that great reasoning and conversation there. He talks about a dictator's peace on page 72. What does he claim about this dictator's peace? What would a dictator's peace look like to Roosevelt? He's talking about if Hitler set the terms of a peace, what would those terms look like?
Well, isn't a dictator's peace basically doing what they're telling us to do? They're peaceful with us as long as we do what they tell, right?
Sure. He says specifically, going right along with what you're saying, Heidi, no realistic American can...
Okay, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. What was that? I'm sorry?
Could you hear what I just said? Could you hear what I just said? No?
I thought so, but maybe not.
I think I had a problem with my mic, and then I couldn't hear you answering, so I wasn't sure if you even heard me talking.
Oh, okay. Yeah, maybe you can say it again.
I'm just saying that, in my opinion, a dictator's peace is, well, we'll let you have peace as long as you do what we say. Yeah, definitely. That's a great comment. And as FDR says here, he said, no realistic American can expect from a dictator's peace international generosity, or return of true independence, or world disarmament, or freedom of expression, or freedom of religion, or even good business. And so he says, such a peace would bring no security for us or for our neighbors. And those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. So he then talks about how, as a nation, we may take pride in the fact that we are soft-hearted. This is on 72, the next paragraph. But we cannot afford to be soft-headed. So what do you think he means by that? We can't afford to be soft-headed at a time like this. Well, it kind of means we have to think tough and not just go off our emotions. Well, but in a way they are telling. I was going to say, in a way, though, they are telling us to go off our emotions too. So it's kind of double talk at the same time. But he's saying,
what does it mean to think tough? What would that look like?
You got to go in and do what needs to be done. We're going to have to go to war with these people and, squash them, basically.
Okay. Yeah. Well, let's look.
Seems like
He said that appeasement is soft-headed.
Right. Yeah, appeasement is soft-headed. And in fact, he talks about 3 points of his sort of hard-headedness, if you will, right? This vision for American national policy that he explains. If we go to page 74, what are these 3 points? What are these 3 points of American national policy, as Roosevelt calls it?
I have a quick question, if that's okay.
Sure.
I was trying to open up these readings, but I can't right now. But is this after Pearl Harbor? Is this what he's talking about?
No. We're still in January 1941, and Pearl Harbor was December 1941.
So almost a whole year later, right?
Yep.
Okay, never mind. Thanks.
No, that's a great question. Do you have Word, Microsoft Word?
Yeah, I tried opening the readings, but I don't know why it won't. I don't know. I'm not really good with computers.
Oh. Yeah,
It's okay. I'll figure it out.
Okay. I'm
Just carry
sorry.
on.
I know they work for me when I have Word, but
That's fine.
Well, what do we think with these 3 points? What are the 3 points?
To have a strong national defense, to give support to the people that we support, and to never give in to try, what did he call it? Peace, tyranny, the peace of tyranny, a dictator's peace. To not succumb to dictator's peace. Right,
definitely. Excellent. So we will build up our own armaments. We'll
help others by giving them armaments, and we'll make sure that we don't ever agree to a dictator's peace. Excellent. So as we think then, right, he makes a call for the U.S. to accomplish these goals. What does he say the U.S. needs to do to accomplish his goals for national policy? On page
Increase
70.
in armament production.
Yeah. The immediate need, right, for swift and driving increase in our armament production, right? So we need to militarize even faster. We need to build up our arms production, not only to help others, but also to help ourselves, to protect ourselves for the future. Okay. So if we look then, now we have the most famous part of the speech, the part of the speech that people actually remember from history, the four freedoms. It's very, very interesting to look at these and what he says about them. And in fact, these aren't just freedoms for America. And it's important to note that. FDR felt that these were freedoms for the world. He looked forward to a world founded upon four essential human freedoms. Okay, so what are the four freedoms?
Freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom of want, and freedom from fear.
Mm-hmm. So we have two ofs and two froms. Okay, and so what does he believe each one means? What's his conception of each one? Some of them have more about them than others.
Well, I think it's just the fourth one that's confusing.
Okay, the fourth one, the freedom from fear.
Yeah, he's very clear that he thinks that anyone having weapons is a condition of fear, so everyone needs to disarm.
Mm-hmm. Right. So worldwide reduction of armaments to such a point and in such a thorough fashion that no nation would be in a position to commit an act of physical aggression against any neighbor anywhere in the world. Right. So that's sort of his vision for that type of disarmament or arms reduction. Okay. Now, of course, I think the first two are pretty straightforward, but it is important to note that he says everywhere in the world. So freedom of speech and expression, everywhere in the world. Freedom of every person to worship God in his own way, everywhere in the world. And then freedom from want. What does he mean by freedom from want?
Well,
he doesn't say much about it, really. He just says that will secure to every nation a healthy peacetime life.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know. That's pretty vague, but yet I think people get pretty specific with it.
Sure. Right, so certainly this vision of, the whole world over, people being free from want and, right, economic understandings which will secure, right, to every nation this condition. So these economic understandings, right, are coming from the government, right? So right here, right, if we think about the New Deal programs that created a safety net, he's talking about, well, let's have a safety net everywhere in the world. Now, as we think about these freedoms, right, what would three reasons be why someone would support his vision for the world? And then what would three reasons be why someone would oppose his vision for the world? Parts of it, in any case.
Well, in support of us would be... Sorry, Wendy. I was just going to say, in support of it, you would believe what he said could be possible, that the government will take care of what you want and you won't need anything anymore. That they're there to make sure everything's going to be okay and you're never going to need anything anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Or want.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's different than need. I don't know. Although that's really weird. It really should have been more freedom from need than freedom from want, because I want a lot of things, but I don't think the government's going to give them to me. But
Right.
Can I get something straight real quick?
Sure.
So his idea to meet all these needs was for the government to step in and make sure they're supplied. All these four freedoms.
Sure. Just look at the New Deal programs. That would be an example.
Okay. So I ask myself, how can the government guarantee freedom from want without being socialistic? And so
they can't, Caden.
Yeah.
Good question.
So that's why I'd say someone would oppose that, because they could see in reality they'd be losing freedoms.
Mm-hmm.
I think the freedom to fail should be maybe out of freedom, I guess. I think the freedom to fail is just as important as the freedom to succeed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks so much for that. And of course, right, there are many people who have no problem with the first two, meaning freedom of speech and expression and freedom of religion, and then people who have a lot of problems with the last two, freedom from want, freedom from fear. Any other comments?
Well, I have a question.
I don't even think that socialism or communism really does provide freedom from want.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it doesn't. It actually makes people worse off. But the idea that I think the concept that maybe it could be is enough to drive people.
Mm-hmm.
So
go ahead.
Okay, I have kind of I have a question. So how was this accepted by people? Did most of them go, yeah, this sounds really great? Or did anybody say, wait a minute, those first two sound good, but those last two I'm not so sure about? I just wondered what the American people thought of this speech.
Oh, yeah. Well, Roosevelt was one of the most controversial presidents ever, and he always had people on both sides of the fence. Those who thought he should have gone even further on the left, what you could call today's left, those who feel that he went way, way, way too far on the right, and, lots of people in between. And so he took lots of flack for this. At the same time, the average American, at least as far as polls are concerned, absolutely loved Roosevelt because of the promises that he made and the vision that he had for their lives. Because really, he was preaching the doctrine or the myth, if you will, depending on how you want to see it, right, of the American dream. All of these things are possible for the masses. And of course, that sounds good to most people. Now, you had, like I said, you had those on either extreme, who would be one way or the other. But Roosevelt was one of the most popular presidents ever, at least in terms of mainstream America. You had people on both sides, like I said, who had slightly different opinions. And of course, the right was always much more displeased with Roosevelt than the left.
And I just recently found out that Utah, he won 69% of the vote in Utah.
Wow, and that's a number I didn't know.
And that was after the first presidency put an editorial in the Deseret News begging Mormons not to vote for him.
Mm-hmm. So that's definitely, it just goes to show you, right, the level of popularity, right? I mean, people, when he died, it was one of the saddest moments in American history, as you read the accounts of people weeping and weeping and weeping and weeping and weeping for this president who truly they felt had, been their savior figure in the government. So, he inspired Americans in a way that few have, for better or worse, for sure. Well, if we look at these...
Gentile, doesn't the controversy still exist today? I mean, wouldn't you have people still say, oh, I think he's the best president we ever had, and wouldn't you have other people say, I think he was the most dangerous president we ever had?
Definitely, 100%.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So still, the argument hasn't been settled.
Right. No, definitely, yes.
Okay.
Totally. And the same people feel the same ways, just now they're a little bit, they have different clothes on, because we're in the new millennium. Well, I love this quote here by Elder Oaks. This is from Religious Values and Public Policy, 1992. He said here, when our laws or our public leaders question the existence of absolute moral values, they undercut the basis for the voluntary fulfillment of responsibilities, which is economical, and compel our society to rely more and more on the legal enforcement of rights, which is expensive. And I love thinking about this here. What is he saying?
Okay, well I was only half listening because I was writing down this reference so I could look back on it. But it sounds to me like he's just basically saying the more you rely on government, the less you're going to rely on yourself.
Sure. Would anybody add to that?
It's just, this is just his speech here. I don't know if this is the first time an American president voiced this as being a human right, freedom from want, freedom from fear. But we can clearly see what it's evolved to with the UN Charter on the Human Rights. Now, every human should have a right to a job, a right to health care, a right to the arts. I mean, this is just it's just the move towards tyranny. I'm confused by his sentence on page 76. To that new order, we oppose the greater conception, the moral order. What is he talking about there?
Let's see here. To that new order, we oppose the greater conception, the moral order. So I think he's trying to say that fascism and communism and Nazism are immoral, but American morality will oppose these measures.
It just sounds like he's saying we oppose the moral order.
Yeah, I think it's just in his phrasing there, which I agree could definitely be clarified.
Another Freudian slip.
So a great quote here, and it's interesting. Elder Oaks talks about true rights, right? Talking about how the closest approach to scriptural stature of the Constitution, right, is the phrasing of our Bill of Rights. And he goes on and talks about it. And so as we think about this sort of, right to expression or speech, right to worship, right, well, those certainly, I think we would agree, are wonderful. And as President Benson said, reason, necessity, tradition, and religious conviction all lead me to accept the divine origin of these rights, as opposed to perhaps the second two, right? Well, if we look, I love this one here. Sterling W. Sill, he said, I can think of something that is far more important to our success than freedom from want, and that is the freedom to want. And in this great article, he talks about how important it is that we learn how to work, that we learn how to find out who we are through toil, that we improve our talents, that we grow, that we learn from our mistakes, that we prove ourselves here during our time on this earth by wanting to become, wanting to improve, wanting to progress, rather than having everything handed to us in which we are enabled to be helpless and weak. So it's a great article. And then, of course, on the other side, you could say that certainly Roosevelt's talking about preparation, and just as Captain Moroni prepared the minds of the people as well as strengthened the armies and erected the forts, etc., well, Roosevelt is talking about national defense, and so it gives us something to ponder. Well, if we keep looking then about the road to Pearl Harbor, we'll get there shortly. Ensuring that the new Lend-Lease armaments reached Britain was difficult because of the presence of patrolling German submarines, which sank up to 500,000 tons of cargo each month. To remedy the problem, and watch how things escalate from here, okay? To remedy the problem, FDR sent American vessels to escort the British ships that transported American supplies. In June 1941, Hitler betrayed the Nazi-Soviet Pact of 1939, in which they both were able to invade parts of Poland and work together, and he invaded Russia. FDR persuaded Congress to extend Lend-Lease privileges to Stalin, which was the first step toward a formal Soviet-American alliance. And this, of course, alliance would be incredibly tenuous the rest of the way. With the U.S. supplying armaments to Hitler's enemies on two fronts, and with the U.S. Navy playing an increasingly large role in protecting the flow of those armaments across the Atlantic, Hitler began targeting and sinking American vessels. In the fall of 1941, so this is the fall, FDR ordered the American Navy to fire at German submarines and, equipped with arms, its merchant ships, which were now to sail into war zones to reach Allied ports. So this is a change. In effect, these decisions began a U.S. naval war against Germany. In April of 1941, military officers from the U.S. and Britain met secretly to discuss a joint strategy to follow if the U.S. were to enter the war. And then in August, FDR and Churchill signed the Atlantic Charter, which asserted principles for a better future for the world, including, quote, the final destruction of the Nazi tyranny, close quote. It seemed only a matter of time before the U.S. would proclaim status as an official belligerent nation in the global conflict, but most Americans believed that it would not be right to do so until an attack came from across the Atlantic or the Pacific. So here we have the path to Pearl Harbor. FDR, along with the overwhelming majority of Americans, was sharply critical of Japan's aggression in the Sino-Japanese War. We talked about the Sino-Japanese War, 37 through 45, Japan attacking China. As a result, FDR canceled a long-standing commercial treaty with Japan, and after Japan conquered Indochina, Vietnam, Cambodia, that area, and prepared to assault the Dutch East Indies, right, he froze all Japanese assets in the U.S. and then created a complete trade embargo on Japan, which severely cut into Japan's ability to buy crucial supplies, especially oil. As Japan's imperial fuel needs became desperate, Hideki Tojo, Japan's new prime minister and leader of the War Party, could see no other alternative than war against the United States. By November 27th, American intelligence had decoded Japanese messages that clearly stated that war was imminent and that an attack was only a matter of days away. Washington did not know where the attack would occur, but figured that British or Dutch colonies, right, in these East Indies were likely the targets. U.S. intelligence watched closely as a large Japanese fleet sailed southward through the China Sea and did not anticipate a direct attack on Hawaii because it was so far from Japan. And then we have Sunday, December 7th, 1941. Japanese bombers, which had taken off from aircraft carriers hundreds of miles away, attacked a completely unprepared U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor. The U.S. ships, they were bunched together in the harbor, and the planes, which were parked in rows on runways, were easy targets. And within 120 minutes, only 2 hours, the Japanese destroyed 8 battleships, 3 cruisers, 4 other ships, but luckily no aircraft carriers, which were stationed elsewhere, 188 planes, and then other command buildings. The attack would kill over 2,000 Americans and wound 1,000 more, and no other single event, as we talked about at the beginning of the class, would unify the American people behind the war effort, FDR's goal for over 2 years, more than the tragedy at Pearl Harbor. Almost overnight, a nation committed to fight. Okay, so here's a picture. You can see the Japanese Zeros as they're diving in to bomb. You can see the U.S. ships that are bunched together along the harbor here at the U.S. Naval Base. You can see some planes that are just stationed on runways. And you can see how on this sleepy Sunday morning, it would be no contest at all for these soldiers who were completely unprepared for the attack. Okay, so page 77 of your readings. Page 77. What does FDR imply about U.S. knowledge of the Japanese attack?
Are you just referring to the fact that he said they deceived us, they must have planned this long in advance, and they deliberately sought to deceive us? Is that what you mean?
Sure, yeah. It was sudden, it was deliberate, especially we didn't know about it, right? That's the main implied message, that, we weren't prepared for this. They were telling us one thing, and then they did something else, and we were not ready. We couldn't have been ready. It'll be important to keep that in mind. On page 77, then, what does he say about the Japanese government's knowledge of the attack? That while they were meeting with us and carrying on negotiations for peace, what was actually going on?
Yeah, they basically had been deceiving us. They were planning this the whole time. They were making us think that they were going to peacefully, come to an agreement.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And what is, of course, one of his main reasons for saying that? What does he point to?
Well, they had negotiations going on to, come to an agreement about the trade.
That's right, that's right. And as they were trying to do that, it's interesting, if you look at the third paragraph here, he talks about how it will be recorded that the distance of Hawaii from Japan makes it obvious that the attack was deliberately planned many days or even weeks ago. And then during the intervening time, he talks about how Japan was deliberately deceiving them. So he's saying here, okay, they knew about it, we didn't. Well, okay, what else does he say about the extent of the Japanese offensive that began on that same day? What does he say? Where else did they attack?
Oh, Malaysia, Hong Kong, Guam, Philippines.
Wake Island, Midway Island.
Yeah, right. So this is, as he says, a surprise offensive extending throughout the Pacific area. So this is a big deal. And now he's saying that it's such a big deal that, what does it warrant?
For Congress to declare war.
Right. It warrants a declaration of war by the U.S. Congress. Well, if we look at this then, let's try to relate. Let's try to understand. Of course, we've shared this before. This is the official commentary in the Institute Doctrine and Covenant Student Manual, the quote by President David O. McKay when he was a member of the first presidency. But it was in the General Conference Report of April 1942, the conference that immediately followed Pearl Harbor, of course, in December. And so let's just go over these one more time. What does he say here, and what is the church officially publishing in terms of causes that would justify war? From this quote.
That you never begin a war.
Mm-hmm.
You wait for someone else to begin it. That that you'd be justified then if someone was depriving you of your free agency.
Mm-hmm.
And he mentions loyalty, and then he said that there might be a third possibility of defense of a weak nation.
Yeah, excellent, right? So, of course, we've been over these before, but I always think it's important to go back to the official commentary to make sure that we know what the brethren have said. Well, if we look, I've done a little more digging for you, and I found some First Presidency messages from the General Conference of April 1942, this same General Conference that came directly following Pearl Harbor, with the next closest one to it. Okay, here we have some interesting messages that I think will help us to understand what the First Presidency was thinking about at this time. We have one here. It says, the state is responsible for the civil control of its citizens or subjects, for their political welfare, and for carrying forward political policies, domestic and foreign, of the body politic. For these policies, their success or failure, the state is alone responsible and must carry their burdens. All these matters involve and directly affect church members because they are part of the body politic. But he goes on to say, or they go on to say, that this official statement by the First Presidency at the end of conference, but the church itself as such has no responsibility for these policies, as to which it has no means of doing more than urging its members fully to render that loyalty to their country and to free institutions which the loftiest patriotism calls for. So in essence, what are they saying with this one?
Once war is declared, you need to be loyal to your country.
Right. And just as a little FYI, during World War II, the First Presidency consisted of Heber J. Grant as the prophet, J. Reuben Clark, and then David O. McKay. So just if you're wondering. Okay, here we have another one that talks about, of course, the famous quote that we've talked about, therefore renounce war and proclaim peace. They say that thus the church is and must be against war. The church itself cannot wage war unless and until the Lord shall issue new commands. It cannot regard war as a righteous means of settling international disputes. These should and could be settled, the nations agreeing, by peaceful negotiation and adjustment. But it is important to note that, here in the bottom, if hearkening to that call, meaning from the government, and obeying those in command over them, they shall take the lives of those who fight against them, that will not make of them murderers, nor subject them to the penalty that God has prescribed for those who kill. So what is the important doctrine here to understand if you were ever to be called into war?
Well, that if you end up killing someone, that's not necessarily on your head, it's on the government's head, is the way I understand it.
Right, sure, definitely. If we look at this here, on each side, they believe they are fighting for home and country and freedom. On each side, our brethren pray to the same God in the same name for victory. Both sides cannot be wholly right. Perhaps neither is without wrong. God will work out in his own due time and in his own sovereign way the justice and right of the conflict. But he will not hold the innocent instrumentalities of the war, our brethren in arms, responsible for the conflict. This is a major crisis in the world life of man, and God is at the helm. So what message do you take from this part of the First Presidency message?
The church is in many different countries, and so they have to be careful with what they say, and each person needs to obey the laws of their land.
Mm-hmm. Right.
This is interesting to me because in the Book of Mormon, there's no question, which side has God on their side. It's the righteous. It's good and bad.
Mm-hmm.
A war where you can't tell. I mean, we have soldiers. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. If there's, in a war where both sides are both praying, to the same God for help, and they both consist of good, righteous people, it's very interesting because you don't really hear of that, in Book of Mormon times. It's kind of a different concept of war.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of hard to judge, who's right and who's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's the case, should we even be at war if we don't even know who's right and wrong? It's
Right.
very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for that comment, Caden.
That's a good point, Caden.
Yeah, that's a great point. But I love this, and this is a theme. We saw this when I found some quotes from the First Presidency during World War I, and listen to this theme, right? Because no matter what, here's the message. To our young men who go into service, no matter whom they serve or where, we say, live clean. Keep the commandments of the Lord. Pray to him constantly to preserve you in truth and righteousness. Live as you pray. And then, whatever betides you, the Lord will be with you, and nothing will happen to you that will not be to the honor and glory of God and to your salvation and exaltation. There will come into your hearts from the living of the pure life you pray for a joy that will pass your powers of expression or understanding. The Lord will be always near you. He will comfort you. You will feel his presence in the hour of your greatest tribulation. He will guard and protect you to the full extent that accords with his all-wise purpose. So what's the message here?
Well, it reminds me of what we talked about through every period of history, that you may find yourself in a really bad situation, but basically it all comes down to how you personally conduct yourself, even if you're in a situation you don't want to be in.
Yeah, definitely. Any other comments about this one?
I think it also shows us that God really is greater than anything that happens on this earth, and that he's so aware of all of our personal situations. So what the presidency seems to be saying here is no matter what side you're on or what you're asked to do, live the laws of God and do your very best, and the Lord is completely aware of you. And I think that's a very big comfort, that no matter what, as Heidi was just saying, whatever we find ourselves in, that the Lord is the understanding one, the one that knows, what we're being asked to do, and then what we're trying to do to obey his commandments, and he's the judge of all.
Mm-hmm.
I guess is the biggest conclusion.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Christina. That's a great comment. As we look at the reaction here, it'll be interesting to see what you think about it. On December 8th, FDR addressed a joint session of Congress, and within 4 hours, the Senate and House approved a declaration of war against Japan. Only Jeanette Rankin of Montana opposed. She was a pacifist. She had opposed World War I, and she then voted against war again this time as well. On December 11th, Germany and Italy fulfilled their parts of the Tripartite Pact by declaring war on the U.S., and the U.S. responded by declaring war on them. For the second time in only a quarter of a century, the U.S. was engaged in a global war, one that would prove to be the greatest, deadliest, and most destructive conflict of arms in human history. And here I have a graphic for you to just show you the votes in the Senate and in the House on declaring war on Japan, Germany and Italy, and then later Bulgaria, Hungary, and Romania. And as you can see, votes in the Senate, 82 to 0, 88 to 0, 90 to 0, 73 to 0, and then votes in the House, 388 to 1, and that was Jeanette Rankin, and then 393 to 0, 399 to 0, 357 to 0, 360 to 0, and 361 to 0. So, just curious, are you surprised by how overwhelming the majority was?
Well, I have a question. How come she only voted against war with Japan, but not against Germany, Italy, Bulgaria, and the rest? It looks like she only voted against Japan, going to war with Japan. That's
a great question. I don't know if she just didn't attend those other sessions and just didn't vote, or if she changed her mind. I'm not sure. It's a great question.
Because it seems like if she would feel justified with any of them, it would be Japan, since they're the ones that had just attacked us.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I can say I'm somewhat surprised. I wouldn't have thought that there would have been only one abstention out of the entire Congress.
Mm-hmm.
But I would be curious to know how the prophet would have voted had he been a member of Congress. I've been I've been reading the conference addresses that came out in October, 2 months before the attack on Pearl Harbor, and the prophet in October of that conference said, I pray with all my heart and soul that any man that is doing anything to get us into war, that he may be confounded, and set aside a day to pray and to fast and to ask the Lord to preserve us as a nation from getting into war. And say at that in the conference in April of 1941, President Clark said that that the World War that they're saying they're trying to entice the United States into World War. They say this is the only way the peace of the world can be preserved. This is the most profound fallacy, and America has no place in such a conflict. And of course I have private. These are public pronouncements, but and I have private letters. But if they had been in Congress, I really would like to know how they would have voted.
Yeah, that's a great question, Wendy. Right? If we had the quorum of the 12 apostles, making the vote for war, it would have been interesting to see what the outcome would have been. Thank you so much for that. Well, this is all we have time for today, but stay tuned for your tutorials this week because I have some very, very interesting things to share with you about Pearl Harbor, about knowledge that the U.S. may have had, about the attack before it happened, about Japanese knowledge about the attack before it happened, etc. And so I have lots of different perspectives to share with you about that, and I think it'll provide lots of rich discussion during our tutorials. So thank you so much for your great participation today, and I look forward not this coming Tuesday because we'll be on Easter break, but on April 13th. April 13th will be our next class, well, actually, no, sorry, it's not Tuesday. I thought it was Wednesday. It's actually Tuesday, and we will have class tomorrow as planned. Sorry. Class tomorrow, yes, otherwise known as March 31st. I've been preparing the PowerPoint for it. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten you. It's actually completed at this point. But yes, perspectives on World War II. So we'll look at lots of different perspectives on the war. That'll be tomorrow as planned, and then we'll come back from the break. So thank you so much, everybody, and see you tomorrow, Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Gentile.
Yep, bye.
Thank you.
Bye.